Okay, hello there, guys. I hope you're doing well. Today, we're going to be doing something a little bit differently. I'm going to be walking you guys through my escape from the Australian gulag because I've been asked by lots of Bitcoiners on Twitter, hey, how the hell did you get out of Australia? So I'm going to do a little podcast today explaining why I left, how I did it, the challenges involved with escaping Australia, whether I intend on going back, and most importantly, how I think the sovereign individual thesis will unfold over the coming decade, because that book really did influence my decision to leave Australia and look for a private citadel somewhere else around the world. So that is what we're going to be talking about in today's video. It also kind of kills two birds with one stone because I didn't have time to schedule a Zoom recording with someone else to rip a normal one-on-one kind of podcast this week. So we're going to kill two birds with one stone, and you guys are just going to have to put up with me ranting and raving into a camera for today's podcast. That is actually why I have been so busy recently and haven't been able to put out the same, podcast every week, because I've been really, really busy trying to escape Australia and look for a sovereign country somewhere else around the world. So we're going to get into that today. First, we should probably hear from the show sponsor, who is Coinbeast. Do you guys need Bitcoin support? Well, you can book a one-on-one video call with a Bitcoin Pro at Coinbeast Connect. You can ask questions about mining, self-custody, multi-sig setups, how to run a full node, how to run the Lightning Network, and how to use that to accept Bitcoin payments. It's really easy. All you need to do is go to coinbeast.com, select a pro and a time that you're available, and that's it. You can schedule a meeting with any Bitcoin Pro that you like. It's that simple. Learning about Bitcoin has never been easier. So that's our show sponsor from today, Coinbeast. Check them out, guys. But let's jump straight on into today's podcast. I have a couple of notes up here on screen. I have two screens here. I'm not just ignoring you guys on my left. I'm trying to get a little bit structured here because I am known to ramble and go off topic. So we're going to start with the big one, the state of Australia and why I chose to leave. Lots of people ask me all the time, Luke, is Australia really as bad as what you see on the news? Yes, bits and pieces, yes and no. So yes, in Melbourne and Sydney, in the cities, things are really bad. Yes, protesters got shot with rubber bullets, running away from the police in a protest. So yes, people getting shot in the back with these rubber projectiles. That's scary. Yes, the government cut off the internet when people were trying to share videos, just documenting this whole process and showing the size of the video. That happened. Yes, the government banned the media at one stage from flying their helicopters over the size of over the top of the protests in the sky and filming how large the protests were. Yes, all of that happened. And most of that was happening when we did have the largest rallies in late 2021. At one stage, there's a couple of rallies that went back to back. And on the weekend, there was 1 million Australians in the street across all the capital cities. So combined, 1 million people marching against the tyrannical actions of our government. So that's like 5% of the Australian population. So there is actually a good amount of pushback from the Australians. And that's maybe why restrictions have been eased recently. But I don't think recent easing in restrictions is anything that you guys should kind of rest on your laurels about. I left because I think it's going to get a lot worse for Western countries around the world as a whole. So that's Australia, that's Canada, that's the UK, even the US to an extent. And oh my God, especially Europe. Europe's fucked. And that's because for a couple of different reasons. Firstly, is I think we're going to be living through the largest sovereign debt bubble bursting of all time in human history. That's a big claim, but the numbers seem to back it up. Most Western countries around the world have a debt to GDP ratio above 130%. And there's a really good report that everybody knows that I keep screaming about by Hirschman Capital. They looked back at the past 250 years of monetary history, and they looked at the 52 countries who reached debt to GDP levels of 130% or higher. 98.5% of those countries that reached debt to GDP levels of 130% defaulted on that debt. So that's a 98.5% chance of default. And when governments default on that debt, they generally chose to default through inflation, currency devaluation, or hyperinflation. Put very simply, governments would simply print money, devalue money, and pay back their massive debts with the devalued money. That's the more politically palatable option and way that governments choose to pay back their debts. It's a little bit more stealthy, and it's a way they can do it without admitting they were wrong. If they chose to default on their massive debt through deflation, they would actually have to come out and say, look, guys, no more money printing, no more massive fiscal deficits being run by the government. We need to tighten our belts. The reason we've got 139% debt to GDP ratio in the United States as of 2021 is because we were irresponsible. We accumulated too much debt. We couldn't balance our budget. So now we're going to stop printing money and we're going to raise rates to where they should be. And obviously asset prices would fall 90%. A lot of people say, Luke, 90%, you're crazy. Well, I don't think so. We've got more debt today around the world than we did in the 1930s. And when we reached the conclusion of that 80-year long-term debt cycle in the 1930s, you saw a 90% correction in asset prices across the board when that debt was able to be deleveraged. But that's beside the point. I could rant about macro for hours. I think Western countries are going to go through a debt deleveraging or a default. You're already starting to see the beginning signs of that. So the US in particular is seeing inflation at its highest level in over 40 years. That's massive. And a lot of people are just brushing that one off. Guess what? It's only going to get worse. And obviously the war with Russia and Ukraine's provided them the perfect political cover to continue printing money and devaluing money to pay back the massive debts they have. But that's beside the point as well. We're talking about the sovereign individual thesis and why I chose to leave Australia. So I think around the world, you're going to see governments defaulting on their debt in the next 5 or 10 years. If you want to know why it's that specific time frame, I've written multiple articles talking about the 80-year long-term debt cycle. But I think essentially in late 2019, when the repo market blew up, that kind of set the timer for we're going to live for about a 10-year period of default or debt deleveraging. We saw the same thing in the 1940s. We saw a 10-year period between 1945 and 1952, where the US government pinned interest rates at an artificially low level, and they let inflation run at 10 or 15% for those 7, 8, 10 years. And they deleveraged themselves from 120% debt to GDP to like 60 to 70% debt to GDP. Obviously, rough figures is off the top of my head, but that's what we're going to see over the next 10 years. Governments just need the perfect excuses to keep interest rates low and continue the money printer going. Obviously, we've seen two perfect excuses. COVID in early 2020, and just as they're about to raise rates, leading into early 2022, surprise, surprise, we've got a war with Russia and Ukraine. So that means we can't raise rates as much as we initially aggressively forecasted. We're going to continue printing money. But that's besides the point. That all that macroeconomic ramble and tangent was a way to say bankrupt governments turn into tyrannical governments. And a lot of the Western countries who have done well over the previous 100 years of this fiat fiasco, like Europe, UK, US, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, you know them, I think their citizens are going to get the biggest shock because they haven't lived through a currency devaluation or a currency crisis like most countries in Africa and Latin America have over the previous 50 years. Is it Argentina who's defaulted on their debt like 3 or 4 times in the past 20 years? I think they've had like 4 currency collapses in the past 30 years. They don't trust their government. They know that their money's broken. They know what it's like to live poor and live through really high levels of inflation. They're not going to get a big shock over the next 10 years when we have some sort of deleveraging event. The people in the Western world, like Australia, Canada, UK, we're pretty entitled. We, as a whole, we think that's just how life is. We think that it's normal to just live off the tit of the government and get paid welfare checks, and that nobody stops to ask themselves, where does that printed money come from? that the government gives me to pay to sit on my ass and support the propaganda that it puts forward. But that's beside the point. Western countries are going to have a pretty shitty few years on their hands. That's why I chose to get out of Australia, because I think shit's only going to get worse. And I think it's a really important time over the next 5 years to surround yourself with like-minded people, which is obviously Bitcoiners. Get yourself into a freedom-loving country or jurisdiction of the world, and surround yourself with Bitcoiners who know what's going on. Because the everyday person or your neighbor who might be really friendly right now, what happens if your neighbor can't feed his family or his kids? Typically, when you look for a currency collapses, the everyday person or someone you might consider a really nice guy, they can turn a little bit crazy when they can't feed their kids. It becomes kind of life and death situation. So that's just reinforcing the point that laser hodls made famous or popular, I suppose. Make yourself asymmetrically hard to bring tyranny to your doorstep. Okay, you want to make it, you want to put yourself in a location where you're protecting yourself. Obviously, if you're living in the cities, the nation state can bring tyranny to your doorstep very easily. You could have a Black Lives Matter or an Antifa protest on your doorstep tomorrow, and they might be demanding money from you. So honestly, that's besides the point. But get yourself in a local kind of community. Get out of the cities, because shit's going to get bad. And the countries, these Western countries are probably going to have the biggest kind of culture shock when shit starts to go down. So that's a little bit on the sovereign individual thesis. I want to talk about countries that I think are going to be good moving forward over the next 5 or 10 years. So I really do think Latin America is the continent you want to be on in the next 10 years. I think the United States is the last stand for freedom. So when I was looking at which country I wanted to go to, obviously the US is number one, and number two was Latin America. So somewhere like Mexico, and anywhere in Latin America. A couple of different reasons why. They're not like the red states in the US and Mexico in particular have their borders open to unvaccinated people. And that's something that I really like. And I think there's a few Eastern European countries and Slovenian countries that kind of are saying no to Klaus Schwab and his great reset agenda, but it's too cold for me. I hate cold weather. I was just in Vegas yesterday and I was shivering my ball sack off the whole time. I hate cold weather. So Mexico or the US for me. And obviously now Latin America. Why do I like Latin America? A lot of Latin America has their borders open, even to the unvaccinated people. And that's because they really do rely on tourism, I suppose, and they don't like Klaus Schwab and the fucking IMF. But I can't say that on YouTube, but they've had a hard time from the IMF over the past 30 or 40 years. So they're not going to enforce the tyranny that Klaus Schwab has enforced onto the Western world's governments. Like we've all seen the Belarus president come out in early 2020, and he was very open about it. He was like, look, I just got offered an $890 million bribe from the IMF, or was it the World Economic Forum? I'm pretty sure it was the IMF, to lock down my country and enforce martial law. I'm not doing it though. Fuck you, Klaus Schwab. This was the president of Belarus saying this. So we can only assume or speculate that other Western countries have taken that money, but it would appear that a lot of Latin American countries have said no to Klaus Schwab because they've been in debt to the IMF before, and they've essentially made themselves debt slaves. So countries like Mexico and El Salvador, they've got their borders open to unvaccinated people, and I think that's a really interesting trend to observe. I think it's also interesting to observe the rise of Bitcoin in lots of countries across Latin America. Whether it's Colombia, Mexico, there's the two richest people in Mexico are battling it out to accept Bitcoin at their shops. And you've also got a politician, the young female whose name escapes my mind, trying to implement Bitcoin as legal tender in Mexico. She's probably small and she's probably not going to get the bill through, but it's a good trend to observe. A Colombian politician, same story. Panama released friendly Bitcoin and crypto regulation after the El Salvador announcement in 2021. And there's obviously Rio as well. The city of Rio said, yep, we're going to put 1% of our treasury reserves in Bitcoin. And they also implemented a favorable Bitcoin tax structure. There were a few other countries in Latin America that have been posturing as being friendly towards Bitcoin recently, but they escaped my brain at the moment. So I really like Latin America because of the freedom posturing that they're doing around bodily autonomy. But then also in Bitcoin. So I think countries that adopt Bitcoin, they're a good proxy to look at for freedom as well, because obviously a Bitcoin country is going to also adopt freedom. El Salvador is a good example of that. El Salvador adopted Bitcoin, and the majority of Bitcoiners also respect freedom and, let's say, bodily autonomy. And that's because, I suppose, a common trait amongst a lot of Bitcoiners, I don't want to overgeneralize, but a lot of Bitcoiners really value, obviously, not trusting and verifying information. That's why we use Bitcoin and we don't use government money, because we've verified that government money is bad. And obviously, a lot of Bitcoiners practice that principles in lots of other aspects of their life. So they verify government medicine, and they verify the education system, and they've come to conclusions that those things aren't, the government's also lying to us in those other aspects. So Bitcoiners obviously believe in freedom and bodily autonomy after they've done that verification. I'll leave that tangent there and try not to get kicked off YouTube. But so you're going to see countries adopt Bitcoin like El Salvador, and then you're also going to see them come out and do what Nayib Bukele did. He said, you know what? You're not going to have to shove that thing with methyl oxide or whatever on the end of the tip of it halfway up your nose to enter our country. No PCR tests. And you know what? You don't need to be vaccinated to come in. I thought that was very interesting by El Salvador. And I think that's something that other Latin American countries, if they adopt Bitcoin legal tender, I will be interested to watch whether they also adopt freedom ideology and bodily autonomy practices like Nayib Bukele did. So I've touched on a few things there. I've touched on countries that I like moving forward. Get out of Europe, guys. I think Europe's an absolute Orwellian hellhole. Obviously, that's where Davos is centered. Klaus Schwab I'm pretty sure he's in Germany, and Davos is centered out of Europe. I see that going down the gurgler. The blue states in the US, they're probably going down the gurgler. Australia, the UK, they've got further to fall, guys. These Latin American countries have lived through poverty and inflation for their whole life. If it gets a little bit worse, it's not going to change dramatically. I think shit's going to change dramatically in the Western world. So that's a little bit. Let's talk about the process of actually getting out of Australia after I take a quick swig on my Tiki Out Sunkist. So I've got a lot of Bitcoiners asking, how the hell did you even get out of Australia? Because they only opened the international borders about a month ago. I was pretty much on the first flight, fuck out of there. I think they only opened their borders 3 or 4 weeks ago. And obviously I had the extra challenge of being unvaccinated, because I refuse to take government medicine no matter what. For reasons we're probably not going to go into on this podcast, but there's many. So obviously, as an unvaccinated person, I actually had to ask the government's permission to leave the country. Yeah, that's right. In a free and democratic country, I had to ask the government's permission whether I could leave, and they actually approved it. Surprise, surprise. So you have to fill out a stat deck. You need a letter from your boss to say, look, they need you overseas. So my amazing new boss sorted me out there with a work letter to get me overseas to Mexico. So that was great. And obviously you have to write a stat deck, and you have to also say that you're not going to need the government's help into the future. So that's what you have to do. And you have to say you're leaving for longer than 3 months. So I did all that. Government approved my travel request to leave the country. Unbelievable, honestly. Ask yourself, if you really do live in a free country, do you need to actually ask the government's permission to leave your jail cell? That's what it's like. It's literally an open air prison, and I'm not going back under any circumstance. So that was the process of getting out of Australia. The process of getting into Mexico. So this is where the shit show continues. because there's no direct flights from Australia to Mexico. So you had to go through connecting flights. Obviously, most of the flights from Australia that get you to Mexico, they go Australia, the United States, and then Mexico. Well, guess what? The US has their borders closed to the unvaccinated people. So I couldn't even transit through the US. I had to find another route. So you can go from Australia to Turkey to Mexico. I believe that's a route. You can also go Australia. I'm pretty sure you can go to Doha or Dubai and to Mexico. Pretty sure that's a route that the unvaccinated can take. You can go through Japan, but you have to do like a week's quarantine from memory. And believe it or not, the route I took was Canada. You can transit through Canada being an unvaccinated person. Yes, I was surprised as you all are, given just how tyrannical Canada has gone recently. That's actually a great sorry, excuse me. That's actually a great point about Canada. People say, oh, the Western countries can't get too tyrannical. Did you just see Canada? They're literally freezing people's bank accounts. And that's just a sign of things to come from the Western countries. And citizens in Canada would have been pretty damn shocked watching that one. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. You're already hearing talk of unrealized capital gains talk in the US, and you've also got talk in Austria and Australia about a health tax being imposed on the unvaccinated people. So that means if you're unquaxed, what they're going to do is they're going to take money out of your bank account every month and call it a health tax. Expect things like that to continue in the Western world, guys. They're going to milk those tax cows dry, and that's how they're going to try and pay for their massive debt. They're going to obviously raise taxes, and they're going to steal your wealth through the silent tax that is currency devaluation and inflation. So, be on the lookout there. That was a little bit of a side tangent, but that's how I got into Mexico. You need to find a connecting flight. And then obviously this doesn't just apply for Mexico. This is anywhere in Latin America. So El Salvador's the same or very similar. And there's lots of other nice little countries in Latin America that are shaping up pretty nicely in my eyes. I think that's just about everything I wanted to hit on, guys. I was in Mexico for a couple of weeks. People asking me what it's like. I went to Cancun, more of a kind of touristy area. Mexico is a beautiful country. It's not a first world country though. Like, you will get a little bit of a culture shock. Like, people are pretty poor there. They are. But it's a very nice country, very nice people, very nice people indeed. I got by on fuck all Spanish. I didn't know much Spanish whatsoever. I could still get by. There's lots of English speaking people, lots of Bitcoiners in Mexico, which is really what you want to see. Obviously, lots of other Bitcoiners have come to the conclusion that they're going to flee their Western, quote unquote, democratic free country and move to El Salvador. So that's something I observed. Lots of Bitcoiners in Mexico. Cancun's very nice. Tulum's very nice. Went and saw the pyramids, the seventh wonder of the world. They were very nice. What can I say? Mexico's a great country. And if I get the boot from the United States, I will happily live in Latin America. I'm not going back to the Australia under any circumstance, really. I really want to get out of those Western countries for living out this kind of transition. Go where you're treated best, honestly, guys. And that's kind of the thesis of the Sovereign Individual Playbook. You're going to have these smaller countries, these free private cities, whether they emerge in Mexico or Nicaragua or El Salvador. These countries are going to be competing for you. So you're going to make yourself, if you're a Bitcoiner, they want your capital. They want you to spend your Bitcoin in their country. Something else I think you should probably do, and something I've been asked about, people say, oh, but what about my job? I don't want to leave my job. Change careers. That's what I did. I shut down in early 2020. I pretty much shut down my small personal training gym because I could see the quaxinations would eventually come to me. This was early 2020. I said, okay, they're eventually going to come for me, especially my industry. I need to find an online job that I can do from anywhere around the world. And I focused my energies on getting Bitcoin jobs, and I've got a handful of them now that I can do remotely anywhere around the world. So honestly, it can be done pretty easily. If a bogan like me can get some online jobs, I'm sure you can. If you want to know more about that, hit me up and I can help you out. Give you some tips and tricks and things to focus on. But it's really it's really pretty easy. If you just do a little bit of work, proof of work, guys, you can, I suggest you look for a mobile job or an online job that enables you to work from anywhere and enables you to leave your Orwellian, draconian, Western, quote unquote, democratic and free country and live in a future citadel. Like, surround yourself with like-minded people who believe in freedom and bodily autonomy. I think that's a good approach moving forward, and especially during the transition. If you're surrounded by Bitcoiners, they're typically preparing to weather this transition. And when shit hits the fan, they're not going to rob you because they know what's coming. They've prepared for it. So that's just about everything I hit on. Something else actually I get asked about a lot is how bad are the masks on the plane? Boy, do I have a story for you guys. I had a fucking 16-hour flight from Sydney, Australia to Vancouver, Canada. And boy, did I have a shit show of a time. I was talking to some Canadian bird there pretty much the whole trip. But so anyway, you're talking to someone, and if your mask slips down, you get a masked Nazi running up the aisle of the plane. Put your damn mask on, they're screaming at you. Within the first hour and a half, I got told off probably, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 times. It was absolutely ridiculous. You got the mask, you can have the mask down under your chin. And say, for example, I had my water bottle like this, about to take a drink, and a masked Nazi would run up. You haven't taken a sip of that water in more than 15 seconds. Put your mask back on. It's unbelievable. I even, so I had food, you got a little fold down tray, had my food, I was eating a little bit of tucker. Obviously it was steak and chicken. I wasn't eating any of that fiat food, guys. But I had my knife and fork, my food on my little fold down plate. I had food on the end of my fork, obviously mask around my chin. I took the cunt off and I had food on my fork, and a masked Nazi come running down the aisle. I've been watching you for the past 12 seconds. You're not eating that food. You need to put your mask back on. I was like, look, mate, I've got a mask on. It was absolutely ridiculous. So about 2 hours in, I copped an official warning. They drew me up one of those stupid fucking documents, essentially saying, look, if we need to warn you about wearing a mask up over your snoz one more time, we're going to stop the flight and you're going to get like a $5,000 fine and all this kind of crap. So how bad are the mask Nazis on the plane? Fucking bad. They made me suffocate for about the other 15 hours of that flight. I had to wear that stupid mask the whole time. And it's annoying. It's disgusting. You can't breathe in it. It's horrendous. I call it human abuse, and I will remember the people who enforce the masks when Nuremberg 2.0 rolls around. Don't you worry. So yes, masks are horrible. Yes, there was a big difference between flights. So that flight from Sydney to Canada, absolute shit show. Like, the Nazis loved their new power. But for example, flights from Mexico to the US and flights within the US borders, not so bad. Not so bad at all. They honestly don't care. They don't give a fuck. So that's interesting. Let me know in the comments what you guys think about that, or whether you've had similar experiences, whether it's just the Canadians and Australians whose the power has gone to the head of the flight attendants and they're actually loving the narrative. They love enforcing the narrative. They believe the narrative. What's the quote from the Matrix? They're so hell-bent on supporting the system at all costs. They will fight for the system at all costs. The quote escapes me, but I think you guys get the gist of it. People in America and Mexico just don't give a fuck. I rarely got asked to put my mask on properly. Like, I'll wear it right up under my chin, hanging off one ear. I would just refuse to put the thing on in the planes, and they didn't care in America or the flights in Mexico either. So thought that was cool. Let me know if you've had the same experiences. I'm just looking at my little list of things I wanted to hit on. I think I've just about hit on everything, guys. I think I've beaten that one to death. The Western countries are going to fall because they're a lot higher up and elevated than these other poorer third world countries that have already lived through tyranny and inflation. Western countries, I think that's just about it. I walked you through the process of how to get out of Australia, masks, Mexico, customs. Oh, I don't know. Okay, so here's another story. I don't know whether it was me and just because I got a shitty haircut and I look like a bogan, but I got some shit in customs in Mexico and the US. So I don't know. I got let in eventually, but both times there's a little bit of a shit show. Maybe they were just trying to fill their quotas and they thought, good little white boy, we can try and cause this guy some ruckus. But customs is okay as long as you don't tell them too much. I think that is just about everything, guys. If you like the video or if you want to hear more about my journey from escaping Australia and into Mexico and the US, let me know. Planes and customs don't check documents very thoroughly. So a lot of people ask me about travel documents. We'll say, if you got a travel document, you're good to go. We'll put it that way. And I hope you enjoyed the video, guys. If you think there's someone suffering from Stockholm syndrome around you and needs a little nudge to take the leap of faith and leave their Western prison, you can send them this video if you like. And I hope it inspires more people to live the sovereign individual thesis, because I think those who do and those who do kind of live that digital nomad life over the next 5 or 10 years, they're going to be profoundly benefited. I think there's lots of opportunities surrounding yourself with like-minded people and escaping tyrannical Western government regimes where you may be paying 50 to 60% in taxes. You're paying for your nose in obviously currency devaluation and inflation, and you're getting locked down like you're some servant living in a jail cell. Why not go and live in a country that's going to actually treat you like a customer and not a cow to be milked for your money? So that's probably my advice, and probably a good note to leave the video out on. So the next podcast, guys, I'm probably going to structure it, going to go back to normal, and it's going to be a one-on-one podcast where I interview a Bitcoiner. But that's my rants for today, guys. Hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it's given you some sort of value or some sort of ideas for what to do. Anyway, always good catching up with you guys. Have a good one.